Yeah, I remember being on vacation. I have not forgotten that. I remember when we chatted about me being on vacation and while I'm on vacation, planning my next vacation.
I tell that story, by the way. It's in my book, The Power of Having Fun. And when I teach, I talk about the person who was sitting planning the next vacation. And now they know it's you. It was you.
Yeah.
Doing that. In this episode, you'll get to know Marlaine McCauley, the continuously learning CEO. And you'll hear the story of how she went from being a single divorced mother struggling to make ends meet to a prosperous owner and CEO of a multi-million-dollar company. I'm Dave Crenshaw, and this is My Success Project. Welcome back, friends, to the Dave Crenshaw Success Project. This is the show where I teach my children how to be successful through the life stories of others, but you get to come along for the ride no matter what your age is. In case this is your first time here, I'm a best-selling author. I speak around the world to Fortune 500 companies, and I've taught millions of people how to be successful through my online courses. With this show, I wanted to create something different, a legacy project that would help my family succeed, and I thought you'd also enjoy learning along with them. During this show, I speak to some of the most successful people I've met in my life's journey. These are people who have achieved balanced, multifaceted success. And today's guest is really special because she's someone who I coached for many years. I was her business coach and helped her grow her business. So during this episode, what we're doing is looking for universal principles of success, things that you can apply in your life and career no matter where you are, who you are, or what you're doing. That's what this success project is all about, because I want to help my kids succeed no matter what they choose to do in their career. As you go through this episode, I want you to look for one thing. I want you to look for something you can do. Look for an action that you can take this week, even better today or tomorrow, that if you do it, you'll make my guest and her story a part of your life forever. And you absolutely want to make Marlaine a part of your life. Marlaine McCauley is the founder and CEO of Apex Facility Resources Incorporated, a leading workspace transition company. She works with clients such as Amazon, Facebook, and Microsoft, just a few small companies. Apex has been listed on the Inc. 500 list and the fastest growing 100 private companies in Washington state. As of 2022, Apex revenues totaled $20 million with 35 employees. Apex has been recognized as one of the top furniture dealers in Washington state. Marlaine is a contributing writer to the Puget Sound Business Journal and a repeat panelist for industry conferences. Marlaine's also a supporter of Sky's the Limit, which helps provide affordable wildlife therapy to teens and young adults. Marlaine, it's so good to talk to you again. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me. It's great to see you again as well.
So just a little background between the two of us. I was your business coach for how many years was it, Marlaine, that we worked together?
I want to say 5.
Yeah, it seems about right.
It could be longer than that.
Yeah.
About 5.
Yeah, it seems about right. I'm, at the moment, I didn't tell you this, but I'm out of the coaching game.
Wow.
Completely taking a break from it. But it was such a joy to get to know you and your business and what you've done with your family and your personal life. I thought you're perfect for this show. I think you'll inspire a lot of people with your story.
Thank you. Yeah, you helped me through some critical moments in my life. And for that, I'm forever grateful.
Yeah, well, it's such an honor to work with you. And maybe we'll talk about a few of those critical moments if you're comfortable with it. So I always like to ask everyone the same question, which is, when you were young, and I'm talking starting in your teenage years, what did you want to be when you grew up? As you started to form an idea about what your career would be, what was your thought at that time?
I wanted to be a legal secretary.
Okay, that's very specific. Where did that come from?
Well, my senior year in high school, I took a typing class and just really, I had a knack for typing. And back then, we didn't have computers. So it was on a typewriter and I liked it. I found it challenging because it was all about sort of a race against myself to improve my time. And I got really good at it and decided that was a good career path for me. I grew up in a blue collar family, so didn't plan to or didn't know if I would be able to go to college. So I decided to pursue vocational training instead.
Interesting. And how many years or how much time did you spend doing that?
Right out of high school, I went to a community college for their legal secretarial program, and I was in that for a year because when I was 13, I happened to punch a girl in the nose and
Happened to.
happened to punch a girl in the nose. And she sued me after I turned 18.
Oh, my goodness.
While I was going to legal secretary school, and the attorney who represented me, their firm ended up hiring me as their receptionist. So that's how I kind of launched my legal career back in the day.
That's an unusual pathway to get yourself into a job.
It was very unusual, yes.
And so the interesting thing about it is I've done these interviews, and sometimes people, they target a career and they head right down that line and they hit it. Others, it's more of a kind of a zigzag process. So was there anything that you learned during that time that you feel actually helps you be more successful today as an entrepreneur of a medium-sized business?
A lot of jobs that you have when you're young is to discover what you don't want to do.
Yes.
That then sort of leads you to something you do want to do. And so I, discovered I didn't want to be a receptionist at a law firm. I really did want to be a legal secretary. And so I worked for sole practitioners for a few years, which was great because I handled a lot of different things at the office, not just the legal secretarial part, but kind of being an office administrator. And so eventually I became a paralegal. I got a job. My dream job was at a certain law firm in Seattle. And I ended up becoming a paralegal for an attorney who did construction litigation for general contractors. And that was sort of the launch for me to eventually be an entrepreneur.
Okay. And so you started doing office administrative work for contractors, for general contractors, or?
I was the paralegal for this attorney who had a really large practice as a construction litigation attorney. And he eventually went out on his own, and I followed him and a couple of other attorneys and became their office administrator in that small office.
And so in that spirit of what you learned influences today, were there things that or lessons that you picked up? Because I know you're an excellent leader and you do such a great job of helping your employees grow. Was there anything that you were learning from your employer at the time that was teaching you how to be an effective leader or how to not be an effective leader?
Yes, I had worked for attorneys who wanted to micromanage and were always sort of hovering over my shoulder, which I didn't appreciate. I found that, as an employee, my happy place was tell me what the end result is that you're looking for. Let me go about doing it. I'll come back and ask you if I have questions, et cetera. And so that attorney that I ended up working with that kind of gave me that confidence I needed, allowed me to do that. And I made some doozy mistakes, but he didn't, yell or chastise. He said, what would you do differently next time? And so I've taken that approach because it made me feel appreciated and valued. And so that I've always given people who may not have followed a college degree path, I look more for attributes. And, I've talked a lot about traits.
Traits versus skills, right?
Right. And so I look for traits over skills. And I think that stemmed from that experience with that attorney.
So you said a couple of things there, and they were almost like throwaway lines, but they're so important that I want to highlight them. And one was that working with that micromanager, you asked them, what is the end result you're looking for? And let me get there. And that is the question to ask when you've got a micromanager, right? Because they want to focus on the how you're doing everything. But good management still holds people accountable. You still follow up with people, but it's more concerned about the end result. Right. So that's so smart that you did that. And I know that you do that now in your business, right? Or when you're teaching leaders as well.
Right.
Yeah. And the other thing that you said was that the leader you worked with allowed you to make mistakes. And that's so critical. When you are leading someone, you don't want to create the culture that no one makes mistakes, or the idea that if you screw up one time, you're out. Because those mistakes are valuable learning opportunities, and we want to use them to grow. With my assistant, it's always, what system adjustment are we going to make from this mistake? Right. And I know you believe in systems too.
You wouldn't be able to tell looking at my desk. I'm reminded I need to kind of go back to my systems.
No, it looks fine. You're hiding it all behind the camera. Is that what you're saying? Yeah,
pretty much.
Okay, so and I know that your marriage, your partnership with your husband's been very important to your journey. So where in here did that marriage occur?
So I got married young initially and had my oldest daughter, Nicole, and then divorced in my mid-20s. And so I was a single parent for 6 years before I met Matt. And it just so happened that the law firm I was managing, the small law firm I was the administrator for, we were moving our office. It wasn't a huge office, but we were moving our office, and the building we were moving to, I asked for preferred vendors that she could recommend that knew her building well. And so Matt was one of 3 vendors I had come through to give us an estimate for our relocation. And funny enough, he said that I failed to show him one of the rooms that had all the boxes in it. So his bid was the lowest. And so he got the bid, he won the bid. And then it was like, what? It's going to cost X? Anyway, long story short, after the project was over, he asked me to lunch, and we got married a year later.
So before we get into that a little bit, I want to back up and talk about the time when you were a single parent, because I think some of our listeners can identify with that story.
Mm-hmm.
What did that do for your motivation in your career? I ask that because I know that my children have been such a high motivator for my success. What did that do for you in the early stages of your career?
It was a huge driving factor because, it's that Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We needed a place to live, food on the table, clothes, etc. And so it was all about earning enough to be able to pay the bills. And I was always finding ways or opportunities to get a promotion or make sure that I always got the maximum raise available every year. And so I was always trying to figure out how I could continue to do a really good job and earn those, extras. And it was a successful recipe for me, although I was exhausted a lot of the time. I was putting in some days long hours. And there were times where, back then we didn't have cell phones. I was taking public transportation, trying to get home to pick up my daughter from daycare. And I was running late, and that $1 a minute late charge it was very, very stressful time. And so, I discovered that down the road, I wanted to have more. It was actually that moment on that bus that one day that I said, I want to someday have more control over my time so that I don't have this feeling in the pit of my stomach anymore. Because she was there waiting for me, not knowing where I was. And she was the last child there. And I said, I want to get to a point in my life where that is no longer a concern.
That's beautiful that you remember that moment. And it sounds like that was pivotal toward your success. And I'm so glad that you're being candid about this too, because I think it gives people hope that might be listening to this and think, I'm working 2 jobs, or I'm, like you said, I'm riding on the bus to get there. And I think we've got some listeners who are in that sort of thing. And I really want to highlight where you are now, which is highly successful, multi-million-dollar business. You've got a lot of free time. You enjoy lots of things that you're doing, but you went through that. So I think there's a bit of, because you did it, anyone can do it, right?
Yeah, I think, sort of fast forward to, say, the pandemic, I could really relate to our employees who had kids at home almost overnight as schools closed. And they were then trying to juggle work and childcare in a completely different way. And, I think that's where, having had those experiences, I could empathize with what they were going through. And to this day, we have continued our remote working for that reason. It's really critical that I don't want people to feel the way I felt that one time. I want them
Yeah.
to feel that they don't have to make that choice.
And you have empathy with and for them because of that, which I think
Exactly.
bleeds into your leadership and the conversations that you have with people.
Yes.
I also think, though, that there's empathy and there's understanding, but there probably, and tell me if I'm wrong, there's probably a little bit of also like kicking people in the rear saying, look, don't feel sorry for yourself. You got to get to work and you got to do those things. My experience with you says that that's also part of that leadership.
Yeah, there is that. I've been where you're at. And yes, sometimes as long as you're getting the work done, I tend to be pretty hands off. But if I see that the work isn't getting done, there's a different conversation. And I am understanding to a point. I give people the opportunity to grow and perhaps change. But if they continue to just stay on the same path without that growth or change, then it's hard not to see that maybe they're not taking it seriously.
Yeah.
They're taking advantage of my, kind spirit.
Which won't help them grow and won't help them get to that level of success.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, so let's go back. You married Matt. This was in the early 90s, right? And then you started Apex not long after that. Is that correct?
Correct. So we got married in 94, and I was 8 months pregnant with our middle child and kind of wanting to make a career change. I'd managed a law firm. I'd been a paralegal a long time, decided I wanted to do something different. And he said, he had an idea that would allow me to work from home. And we basically took that idea and I started a business from it, which is the business I have today.
No matter what your career is, your foundation of success begins with one thing: effective time management. And thanks to the generosity of Microsoft, you can get my entire course, Time Management Fundamentals, for free on LinkedIn Learning. Go to davegift.com to get your free access now. This is the course that millions around the world have used to become more productive and reduce stress. Everyone from Fortune 500 executives to freelancers to students. Now, it's the same coaching I've provided in person for tens of thousands of dollars per day, but you can get it for free on LinkedIn Learning. You don't need to provide anything to access it. No credit card, no email. Just go to davegift.com and start learning. Thank you so much, Microsoft and LinkedIn Learning, for your partnership. davegift.com. So I want to pause on that for a second because even in the conversation that we were talking before about someone in your family who doesn't want to run the business, the decision to become an entrepreneur is unique. A lot of people say that they want to start a business, but not a lot of people are willing to assume the risk that requires. So you were coming from a place where you weren't assuming much risk. You were an employee working for people. Where did that come from? Where did that idea come from that you're like, I'm going to start my business with, I had a note that was $500. I'm going to hang my shingle out there and start it. Like, what in your mind was telling you that this was a good idea?
Again, it started with having more kids. Matt and I had started a family. Nicole was around 12 at the time and wanted to have that flexibility. I also think that by then I had become willing to take risks, and I felt that I had done that along the way in my life. And so,
in what other areas had you taken risk in your life?
I had started a paralegal business basically so that I could freelance.
Okay. So it wasn't your first time.
Yeah. So I already knew how to work, use QuickBooks. And I kind of had this mentality of how hard can it be? And I'm resourceful and I'm, smart. I can figure this out. And what's the worst thing that could happen? This was the one thing that gave me peace of mind around starting my own business. What's the worst thing that could happen? I just go back to working for someone else again, and to me, that was the worst thing that could happen. And so there were some parts of it that came very easy for me. And I remember reading the E-Myth book.
This is
Yeah.
not the first time that book has come up, by the way. And I was a certified eMyth consultant briefly in my career.
Well,
Yeah.
as you know, the ultimate goal is to not have to do all those jobs. And if
Yep.
you find yourself continuing over a period of time to do all those jobs, something's wrong. So I kind of took that to heart, but I was good at, say, 80% of the jobs and figured out how to outsource the areas that I wasn't all that great at. So relied on a subcontractor, for example, to go out and look at job sites for me, do my installs for me, et cetera. So I outsourced the things that I didn't know how to do.
Was it in the first business or the second business that you got the idea in your head, I shouldn't be doing all of this. I should be hiring people. I should be contracting out?
It was the second business,
Okay.
although the first business it was just me. It was my services. I bill them by the, law firms by the hour for my paralegal work. And I had an outsourced bookkeeper. So the idea of outsourcing, I didn't know how to be a bookkeeper, so I outsourced that. The business I have now required a lot more skill sets that I didn't have.
And the question that, if anyone's considering entrepreneurship, the question that you should be asking yourself, you know what, and even to degree to other careers, the question you should be asking is, how can I get someone else to do this? Because if you're the one doing it, then you are shackled to the business. If you're the one doing everything in your career, there's a limit to what you can achieve. So the first business, the paralegal service, I would assume did not succeed because you're not doing it anymore.
Yeah, it was successful until I was working on some cases that were hard for me to let go. They were wrongful death cases. They were involving children and loved ones of families. And I could tell it was making its mark on me. For example, I was very fearful of kids coming over to play at our house with our kids because of some of the lawsuits I had worked on. And the liability that people, I learned a lot about liability and all the different ways that someone, through no fault of their own, finds themselves in a position of being sued. So I was like, no, you can't have so-and-so come over and play, because I was so fearful that they'd get hurt on my property that I was sort of this curmudgeon. I remember Matt saying, what's going on?
Sure.
They want to have play dates. I said, no, we can't have play dates. So anyway.
You do see the irony in that, though, don't you, Marlaine? Right? Where
Yes.
you are now, you went from, I don't want any liability, to all the liability is on me because of the business. Obviously, you structured it in a certain way, so it's not on you personally. But
yeah,
going back to risk, owning a business is a liability landmine, is it not?
it is. Yes,
Yeah.
It is. And that is probably one of those things that keeps me up at night. You pay a lot for business insurance in the hopes that you never need it. The times that you do, it's not pleasant.
But you have business insurance. You probably have key personnel insurance, right?
Yes.
Yeah, see, these are the things that most entrepreneurs don't understand that they need. So I think this is educational, that you, coming from that legal background, recognize these are things I need in my business.
Yes. I think that legal background also helped me read contracts and understand 80% of it is just boilerplate legalese, and I'm comfortable with that. But it's these 2 or 3 areas, usually around payment terms, liability, here that comes up again, and what we're agreeing to do for a particular client. That sometimes, we have to negotiate those things, but most people would not pick those out and say, these are the sticky areas I need to be paying attention to. So that I've saved our company probably, I can't even quantify the legal fees that I've saved by having that skill, being able to identify in contracts some of those risky areas.
Even if you have other attorneys who are involved in the process, your understanding of it helps have a better conversation, be more clear about it.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So I know someone listening might go, well, Dave, why are you spending so much time on that business? But I feel like everything that you learn is valuable. And I also had a mentor who said, do you want to succeed in entrepreneurship? Make sure it's your second time. And that certainly was true for me. right? The first business, that's your training business. That's where you're figuring things out. It's the second business where you go, oh, okay, now I'm going to put it all together and I'm going to avoid all those mistakes I made before.
Yes. Yeah. I think there's a difference between it's just yourself and, going back to the E-Myth, in my paralegal business, it was me. I was selling my time and there wasn't a lot of liability. It was just me agreeing to take on, some work or a case or what have you to work on. And I didn't feel that was as risky as what I do now. So
yeah.
I didn't see it as risky at the time.
Yeah. And for those, again, who are not familiar with the E-Myth, one of the core premises is that if you just are a practitioner, if everything requires you to do it, then you just have a job. You don't own a business. And also you're working for a lunatic who is you.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's a great premise. I don't agree with everything with the E-Myth, but boy, there are some good principles you can pull out of it. Okay, so let's talk about, 1997, Apex begins. 2007, you hit the Inc. 500 list, which is a list of businesses that are the fastest growing businesses in the United States. It's pretty prestigious to hit that list. Talk to me about that 10-year period of time where growth happens, and typically it's crazy growth and everything. Just talk to me about what that life was like in the first 10 years of Apex's existence. First of all, what does Apex provide for those who aren't clear?
We are office interiors company and an office relocation company that we've combined those two things together to help businesses, companies plan their workspace.
And in the first 10 years, did you combine them together or did that come later?
It was in 2004 that we combined the relocation. That's when Matt joined me, was in 2004, and brought that commercial relocation and logistics experience. And we combined those two things.
Did you just focus on office equipment in the first 7 years or so?
Yes, I was focusing on primarily refurbished office cubicles at the very beginning because that was sort of a new thing. And then eventually took on new office furniture like seating, tables, cubicles, and everything in between, basically. So I was furnishing offices. And I did that out of the house for the first until about 2002 because of the dot-com crash. I started getting calls from property managers, businesses who had just installed several floors of brand new furniture and never showed up. Like businesses were tanking all over the place, especially in Seattle with the tech boom back then. All those dot-coms, a lot of them didn't make it. And so there was all this new furniture that these property managers at these office buildings needed to get rid of. I was really the one that they knew to call because I'd already made all these contacts. I knew how to get rid of office furniture without it going into the garbage. So I had to hire somebody because I had to decide to either grow my business or let it die because it was outgrowing me. And that was in the early 2000s.
Wait, so you said you decided you had to hire somebody. So prior to that, was it all just you?
It was just me.
Okay.
Yeah.
Man.
So I was doing all the jobs. I actually taught myself how to do the equivalent of CAD work. So I bought a software program because you need to lay out. I had to learn building codes. I had to learn how to use the software tool to show a customer how the furniture would lay out in their offices. I had to learn about a lot of the different lines of furniture. So it was a huge learning curve, but I kind of thrive on that or used to. And so it's that continuous learner, researcher, project manager skill set that I have that made me pretty successful early on.
Yeah, you really were a practitioner then for the first 5 years or so.
Yes.
Which again is remarkable to where you are now. You have how many employees now?
We have 35 now. At the peak, we had 80.
Okay. Wow. That's quite a growth story. Okay. So was it when that .com crash happened? Is that when things started to take off for your business?
Yes.
And that's interesting too, because I think a lot of times people go, oh, a recession is bad for business. But that's not always true. For a lot of people, it's actually good for business.
Yeah. So I had got an office in one of the executive suites downtown Seattle, hired my first employee, and basically we were just taking calls and going out and looking at projects and trying to find homes for all this gently used or almost never used office furniture, because there were businesses that were still thriving, but they saw an opportunity to get, maybe a good deal on furniture. So when Matt joined me in 2004, I had already been doing work for Amazon, reconfiguring their existing office furniture in their existing space. And that's when they were still pretty small. Amazon was pretty small. Matt had won the commercial relocation contract for Amazon at the company he was working at. And it became apparent that we could benefit the client by combining those two services into one. And so when the PO was expiring for the commercial relocation piece, the client asked us to join forces, and the next PO was cut to Apex. And it was that moment where it put us on that path to the Inc. 500. Because when Matt joined me, he brought a hospital client. I mean, he started bringing that services side of the business, and we started taking off from there.
So that was your husband's side of things. So prior to that, you weren't really working together. He was doing something else, and then you decided to come together to form a powerful team.
Right. I think that our work would overlap at times where maybe he was also doing the relocation on a furniture project I was handling. So it just made sense once our client said, I think, why don't we just cut one PO to Apex?
So let's talk about that for a moment. As someone who has coached many, many businesses, I have typically seen, and of course, there are exceptions, as you're one of them, but I've typically seen husband-wife teams not work well. I typically advise that that you avoid that, because a relationship that has those kind of complexities of both working together and then trying to have a romantic and just a family partnership just doesn't work. So yours has. Talk to me about what you do together to make that partnership work.
Well, I had to compartmentalize at times, and I think Matt would say the same thing. I ultimately think that what brought us together is that I'm strong in areas he's not, and vice versa. He's great at presenting. He's really good at explaining complex logistical projects to clients. He's much better at being client-facing than I am, in my opinion. But I'm more detail-oriented. He's kind of big picture and currently handles our marketing, primarily marketing. And, he's the guy in a room that can talk to anyone, and I'm the one who can't wait to leave a social gathering. But I think at the end of the day, I remember having a conversation where something was contentious. He wanted to, the business to spend money in an area. And I said, not right now. And I said, look, during the day, my job is to be CEO of a company, and my responsibility to the business and the employees who work there requires that I make the best decisions I can for the future of the business. And that means sometimes I'm going to have to say no, but I'm still your wife when I get home. And so we have to be able to separate those two things.
That's easier said than done. So how do you do that in a practical standpoint? I mean, like, you go home, do you just agree that you don't talk about work? How do you create those boundaries is where I'm trying to get.
Yeah. So the kids would, when they were young, would say, we'd be at home talking about work, and they're like, you work together all day. Why are you talking about work? I said, I actually don't see him much during the day because we have different jobs, different roles. And so
I think that's part of the thing that helps, right?
Yes. And so I would say, Dad and I'm like any married couple. How was your day, dear? We're talking about how was your day as if we work in different places. Because there would be times I wouldn't see him all day. So we would catch up. I think now we've had, to navigate that. But I think now it's more around strategic planning and less about, the minutia of the business. So we talk less about the business now than we did when we were growing it, for sure.
And yet you were still able to get through that growth period where it required more attention.
Yeah, I think it was more of a divide and conquer approach where we just identified who had the best skill set to handle the particular thing that was happening at the time.
Yeah.
I tend to be more operationally minded, so anything involving finance, HR, you know, personnel, those types of responsibilities I'm much better at. So I handle that. It's to this day, that's those departments roll up to me.
Yeah, that's really smart of you to create that clear separation with each other. How have you managed the growth of having so many more employees over time?
Well, I like to say I do the wrong thing to then do the right thing.
There's that
um,
second time principle, right?
Yeah. So when we were growing so fast, we were just hiring. If we say if they could fog a mirror, basically we were hiring people, which is
Okay.
how we ended up getting to about 80 employees. And over time, I'd say it's really been in the last 5 years that I've identified to really focus on culture and to doing more with less. And that means using technology to be more efficient, hiring the right person for the right seat because that person, if they're the right person, can do the work of multiple people because they are the right person. So instead of hiring three people that may or may not be right, likely not right if you need three people, that's how we've gotten to 35 employees, is hyper focused on hiring the right people. And it doesn't mean that they are perfect. It just means that their built in DNA is perfect for that role that they're in. And they can crank out the productivity as a result because they love it. They're in the right spot. And we continue to just, I'll use my executive assistant as an example. We call her the Swiss Army knife, but she is so much more than that. I said, could we call you the Gerber multi-tool now? Because she has so many different skill sets. She was languishing in another place because they didn't recognize her skill set and her traits and her talents. And when I interviewed her, she said, my dream job would be to be an editor. And guess what she gets to do a lot of the time is edit and create written text. But then it turned out she loves Excel. She loves all these other things. So finding out what the person loves to do and make sure that they get to do that every day, 80% of the day. And the 20% is stuff we all have to do that we don't necessarily like or are maybe not as good at. But if you can focus 80% of that person's time on the things they love to do that they're good at, it will rocket your
Yes.
business.
Yes. And you're highlighting that concept that we mentioned briefly, which is the traits versus skills. Often in businesses, they'll hire people. Oh, you know how to use Excel spreadsheets. Oh, you have a background in furniture, whatever it is. And we go, oh, they've got the skills. Let's hire them. And that's the wrong way to hire. And instead, you should be
Exactly.
saying, who is this person fundamentally? Are they an extrovert? Are they an introvert? Do they like, as you said, editing? Or do they like going out and do they like building things, right? And
Right.
we want to hire, we can teach the skills. You can teach anyone the skills, but you cannot change their personality. Not, at least not during the time period of which they might be working for your business.
Well, for entrepreneurs that eventually hope to not have just built a job for themselves, that we were referring to in the
Yeah.
E-Myth, if what you want is ultimate freedom at some point in your business, and I feel that we've kind of gotten there at this point, but I don't have to be there day to day, is that premise of hiring the right person in every position. And it doesn't matter how, it could be a top executive. You're still using the same hiring process to make sure that even the top executive isn't going to throw your culture off, number one. But there's a multi-phased approach to it. Yes, they can have a nice resume, but I had someone tell me that anyone can be a good actor in an interview. And so you can't just hire off of someone's resume and a good interview. There's a lot more to it to make sure they're going to be an A player in your organization. But ultimate freedom comes when you can get away. I've been able to get away from the day-to-day in my business And that was the pivotal thing that I changed, was around hiring in order to be able to do that.
Well, we had lots of conversations about that process, right?
Yes.
I want to say one thing. Someone might be listening and say, well, I'm not an entrepreneur. This doesn't apply to me. But if you're working in a Fortune 500 company and you're a manager, you're a leader, you still need to hire for traits, not skills. Otherwise, you're going to be shackled down. You're going to be spending your whole time trying to get someone to be something they're not. And the principle still applies to you.
Right.
Yeah.
I think too that managers who want to, continue to grow in their career need to learn how to hire the right people, because the expectation is, for me, if this person wants to take on more responsibility, they have to be able to offload, and this is something you taught me, offload things off their plate in order to take on new things, or to not fill their plate up with something else. Sometimes it's just getting things off their plate. If they don't have someone they can delegate those things to, they haven't hired well, in my opinion.
Right. And also part of the process of freeing you from the business wasn't just about the hires that you were making, but the hires that the people that you lead were making. We have to, I call it the grandparent principle. It's not about the people that you lead. It's not about your children. It's about your children's children. It's about how your leaders are creating more leaders themselves. And that's a big part of the reason why you have so much freedom. So I have the distance to empty principle, Marlaine, which is the question of how many hours, how many days can you be away from your business and it still runs? For me, it's, I can take 2 months off a year. What's your distance to empty right now? How many days can you feel like obviously there might be a quick check-in, but how many days can you substantially step away from your business and it still runs without you?
Well, I've tested this recently, or in the last few years, really about 18 days. I could probably extend it, I'd say a month, but the actual test that I've done is about 18 days. And that's when I did my cross-state horseback ride.
And you use such a great word there, which is test, right?
Yeah.
So you're testing it and trying it out. And I think that's something that someone listening to this can test as well, right? Just go away for a little bit, see how long you can go. And then you go, okay, that was too long. And that gives you that distance to empty number. So yeah, I love how you phrase that.
Yeah, I remember being on vacation. I have not forgotten that. I remember when we chatted about me being on vacation, and while I'm on vacation, planning my next vacation.
I tell that story, by the way. It's in my book, The Power of Having Fun. And when I teach, I talk about the person who was sitting planning the next vacation. And now they know it's you. It was you.
Yeah.
Doing that. And you said, holy crap, I have a disease, right?
Yes.
I love that phrase.
I think the crazy years where I wasn't able to step away from my business on vacation, I got into this habit of always being present to the company, taking calls, checking emails, et cetera. And I still do that because my inbox gets so crazy, but I only set a certain, a small amount of time aside in the morning with my cup of coffee to clear out my inbox or to address something that might need. But I'm not solving crises. It used to be a joke that when I would go on vacation, someone would quit. There'd be like one of the managers or what have you would quit while I was gone. And so then it was crisis mode. And I think became accustomed to the fact that vacations, it was just being away, but I was still doing the work. And so, yes, being able to test it and say, I can be gone. I remember going early on when Matt joined, we had anniversary trip to Italy planned. And I remember going to internet cafes. It was right at the start of when you could use your cell phone to check emails, and international travel was not a big deal. But back then in Venice, we're looking for, I kid you not, an internet cafe to check email while we're in Venice. So I strongly encourage people to start testing being away and not having to, the work follow you while you're on your oasis.
I think your example is going to inspire a bunch of people who've been listening to this. So I want to shift gears just a little bit before we wrap things up. I know that you're an advocate for wilderness training for, struggling family members, for struggling teenagers in particular. Would you mind sharing a little bit about that story and how you arrived at that for your family?
Yes. My youngest, my son, Lucas, when he was 16, we had an intervention. And there's a lot, probably not enough time in this
Yeah, very involved
to
story.
give all of the background, but I wasn't sleeping. I had insomnia really bad. I was super worried about him and envisioned him living under a bridge somewhere. He was skipping school. He was smoking weed. He was taking LSD and was basically checking out of his life. Although when I would ask him about, or expressing my concern, he would say all the right things, but his behavior was not tracking with what he said he wanted. And I could see him going down this really dark path. But a good kid. And, we of course loved him so much. And I was very, very worried. I actually did take some time away from the business because I was sobbing every day at work and so worried about him. So
Yeah.
fortunately, I was able to take some time away and I started doing some research. Matt had a friend who had a son in a similar situation. And that's where we first learned about wilderness therapy. And that friend's son was now grown and was working in that industry or in that profession.
And
So
can
we
you
called.
just briefly explain the premise of wilderness therapy?
So the premise is that when kids can be removed from or they go out into the wilderness supervised, but they don't have their technology, they get their food for a week, they need to ration it, they become very self-sufficient, but they're supervised with a leader and they have counselors go out to them in wilderness. And so they're really removed from all of the external forces or internal demons, et cetera, that led them to that place.
I'm putting myself in the mindset of someone who's listening. And I know some people maybe have heard bad things about this. They've heard horror stories about it. What has been your perspective, or maybe even more important, what has been Lucas's perspective on that particular experience that he had? What was the group that he did this with?
He went to Open Sky Wilderness.
Okay. So what is his perspective and your perspective on whether or not this was too extreme, the objections that I think people have when they hear about it?
Well, Lucas said it saved his life. He was in wilderness therapy. He was out in the wilderness for 12 weeks, arrived there in early November. So it was winter. The outfit them with really good quality gear. But we were at the point where it was deciding if our son was going to live or die. And I had to make the decision that even if he hated me the rest of his life for making that decision, that he would still be alive. That ultimately became my most important driving factor. Was I wanted my son to live. And I knew that the only way that was going to happen is if we removed him from the environment that he was currently in, where drug dealers were accessible, where, his friend, he had created a social identity around drug culture. And that's where he felt he was being successful. He struggled in school. And, we're hearing more and more about how social media and all of that is now so negatively impacting our kids. And he was definitely in that boat. He was being bullied. And so he found success in this culture that, was very harmful in the long run for him. So he thrived. And over those 12 weeks, we would have phone calls. I mean, the counseling was really helpful. I had things I had to work on.
Can you talk about that just a little bit? What did you learn
so
that you needed to change?
In my desire to help him, I ended up enabling him. I was to the point where I was doing his homework. I just wanted him to get through high school and thought if I could demonstrate that, let me show you how you can do it. Well, he ended up working it and saying, "Oh, Mom, hey, I'm having trouble with this." And I'd end up doing his homework. And so he had a story about himself that he wasn't smart. And so we decided we needed to get him out of his current environment. Matt and I made a commitment that he would be there as long as necessary. And a lot of families I know whose kids, and some we met through Lucas's school experience after he left wilderness therapy. They removed their kids too early. And man, they play on your heartstrings. I hate it here. And, all of those, this is horrible. You've thrown me away. You have to just gut that out, because if we had taken him out too early, he would have just gone right back to what he was doing. And so we had to make that commitment and have the fortitude in the face of, this is horrible. I don't want to be here, to knowing that's exactly where he needed to be, and that we had to see it through. And I think doing that, we all came out the other side so much stronger as a family.
Yeah. I'm so thrilled how that has turned out for your family, because we were working together during that time, and I saw the agony that you were going through during that and how much things are better. In fact, before we started the interview, you were telling me what he's up to. What is he up to right now?
He got his AA as an auto mechanic down in Arizona, and his dream is to work at a Porsche dealership as a tech. And it just got hired and sponsored to go down to Atlanta, the Porsche school there, and is in a 6-month program and will come out basically achieving his dream. And he's 23. So he has a girlfriend. He's super motivated. I mean, it's like, I think we look back now and talk about those times. And I said, I'm so glad you don't hate me. He goes, back at your mom, because he knows he put us through hell. But we're just super strong family. And I can't say enough good things about our experience. As horrible as it was at the time, looking back, it was exactly the right thing for us.
Well, first of all, as a Porsche enthusiast, I couldn't be personally more tickled that that's what's happened to him. And also just knowing you and what you've been through to help him. He went through a lot, but you also went through a lot, and you had to change quite a bit in order to get to the point where you could help him and really get out of the way so that he could help himself. So kudos to you for that. And I'm thrilled for your family, and how you all are generally quite functional and really get along well as a family. That takes a lot of planning and effort as an entrepreneur to create that.
I think it was just another point that I've learned since that I want to mention is we have Lucas's sibling who's 26, Sarah, who's non-binary, and we were growing a business, had these, trials and tribulations with Lucas. And in the background, I think looking back at it now, we did not have a lot of time to give her the attention or them the attention they needed at the time. And that relationship now requires repairing. And so it's a new journey that I'm on, with coming to terms with the fact that the business took so much of my time and attention. And then on top of that, Lucas, during the time that he needed extra time and attention, didn't realize the toll it would take on my other child. So working to repair that now.
Okay.
And we love all our kids. We're very proud of all our kids and feel they're all successful in their own way.
Well, I appreciate and admire the humility that you're expressing, in that you made mistakes and you're learning and you're still trying to grow. And I think that's the best that all of us can strive for, is that we recognize we made choices that we now in hindsight would not have made, and we need to make them right.
Exactly.
So thank you so much for sharing that story, Marlaine. I think there's a lot in here that people are going to benefit from. So unfortunately, we could talk for hours. We could talk for a full day on this. But what I'm going to do that now, and we do this with every episode, is I'm going to wrap up with some possible actions that someone could take this week, maybe even today or tomorrow. And I'll share a few, and then I'd like you to share one. And if this is your first time listening to the show, I'm an advocate that it's not so much about the knowledge that you gain, but it's the action that you take on the knowledge. What are you going to do about this? And Marlaine has opened her heart to us. She's shared candidly her story, and you want to make Marlaine a part of your life. And the way that you're going to do that is by doing one thing. We'll give you a few suggested actions. Pick one, and then that way you can do something about what you heard. So here are a few possible actions that I picked up, Marlaine. The first is to consider if you can create your own bus moment. Marlaine was on the bus and she had that realization that she didn't want that anymore, that she wanted to create more freedom for herself and for her children. And so she made it a pivotal moment. And what I would ask you to consider, listener, is can you create a moment like that? Is there something that you don't want anymore? Often we talk about our vision and what we do want in the future, but sometimes what you don't want is just as important. So take a moment and think about that. What is something you do not want, and can you create your own bus moment? Another thing from Marlaine's story is that principle of not being tied down to your business, not being tied down to your career by outsourcing, by hiring, by getting someone else involved. And I would ask you to just ask yourself the question and consider, can I outsource something? Can I get someone to do something that I do? And you don't have to be an entrepreneur to do that. The proof of that is you don't make your own hamburgers when you go to Wendy's. You will sometimes hire an Uber. You don't go to the Amazon warehouse and pick something up and bring it to your store. You're already outsourcing a lot of things. That's the point. So ask yourself, is there something else I can outsource? Is there something else where I can get someone involved so you have a little more freedom, whether that's your business or your career? And I would also say, consider if there is a cause that you believe in and support. We've heard Marlaine talk about her belief in how wilderness therapy helped her son. Ask yourself, is there something that you can support? Is there something you can give your time and money to? Doing that will help you be more successful. It will add more color to your life. And most importantly, it will help change other people's lives. Marlaine, what's a suggested action you'd add to that list?
Set time aside for yourself to do something that you love to do. I horseback ride. I love being out in the woods, even if it's just for an hour. It's something that's just mine, that fills my soul. And so it could be something else, but I often would put myself last. And I think changing that mindset, and it sounds selfish, but it isn't selfish to do one thing per day or per week, or, your oasis theories around that is true. We have to continue to nurture ourselves in whatever way that is.
Yes,
Whether
I love it.
An hour a day or one day a week or whatever that is, and parents in general, I think moms especially, put ourselves last. We want to do everything we can for our kids. And I think don't forget to do something nice for yourself.
Yes. And I've never thought about it this way, but doing something nice for yourself is benefiting others.
Yes.
Taking care of yourself helps benefit others. It gives something to them. And you're better equipped to help your family, your employees, whatever it is, by taking time for those oases in your day.
Exactly.
Marlaine, this has been exactly what I thought it would be, which is just a joy to talk to you and to hear your story. And thank you so much for your generosity in sharing your experience with us.
Thank you for thinking of me. It's, of course, anytime.
And thank you, everyone, for listening. Remember, don't just hear the story. Do something about the story. Make it a part of your life, and you'll find more fulfillment and more success. Thanks for listening.
You've been listening to the Dave Crenshaw Success Project, hosted by my dad, Dave Crenshaw, and produced by Invaluable Incorporated. Sound editing was done by my brother, Stratton Crenshaw. Research and assistant production by Victoria Bedez. Voiceover by me, Darcy Crenshaw. And the music is by Ryan Brady via Pond 5 licensing. Please subscribe to the Dave Crenshaw Success Project on Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you like to get your podcasts. And please don't forget to leave us a 5-star review. See you next time.